My professor at the UWI, Dr. Agri Brown, used to say that there is no such thing as objectivity, only varying degrees of subjectivity. And that was clearly proven to be true this week, with the Jamaica Observer announcing that one of its reporters was on his way to the land of Israel to visit sites that have historical significance and biblical connections. An Israeli official told the Observer that the government is happy to host the delegation because it provides the opportunity to show reporters from the Caribbean the things from our point of view. Quote, "We really wish that after you see and experience Israel, your opinion would reflect more of how we see things, and we would be happy if you could share it with your readers." Further down it says, "I think you being in Israel, you will hear a lot of details and go deeper into the issues to show what you see to your audience in Jamaica." And here's a bit of the itinerary for the Jamaica Observer's reporter and the rest of the delegation while they're there. While in Israel, the delegation of Caribbean journalists will visit the south of Israel and tour various areas around the Gaza Strip, which stretches 41 kilometers from north to south. The journalists will meet with a Bedouin leader in the south of Israel and will visit the Car Cemetery and the site of the Nova Festival, where more than 380 people were killed. And then it goes on to repeat the now debunked story of violent intimate acts that we now know did not take place. Then it says the delegation will sit on a roundtable talks at the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs, during which discussions regarding relations between Israel, Latin America, and the Caribbean will be discussed. A visit will also be made to the Holocaust Museum, among other sites of historical significance. And then it goes on to talk about what happened on October 7th. Again, it mentions somewhere in the article about the ICC warrants. It talks about what's happening in Lebanon. And it also talks about how, of course, this is the nation that wants to have peace with its neighbors. The article fails to mention the thousands, tens of thousands of people who have been slaughtered, maimed, torn apart, shredded, right, to pieces over the past year. It doesn't mention the mass starvation that is taking place. It doesn't mention the destruction of schools, of hospitals. It does not even mention the killing of journalists and their families, nearly 200 of them. It doesn't even mention how humanitarian workers have been targeted. It doesn't mention how humanitarian workers have been killed. None of this is mentioned in this article whatsoever. It's almost as if, even before the reporter went there, this article was perfectly constructed and carved out to present a particular narrative. So let's deconstruct that narrative. One of the things that the Jamaica Observer and other mainstream media around these Western countries have been doing for the past year is trying to create what is called a false balance. And ironically, this is how the New York Times describes a false balance. False balance, sometimes called false equivalency, refers disparagingly to the practice of journalists who, in their zeal to be fair, present each side of a debate as equally credible, even when the factual evidence is stacked heavily on one side. This is, unironically, the New York Times saying this. The same New York Times which published as fact allegations of mass intimate violence and refused to apologize or retract the article long after the allegations had been disproven. Yes, that New York Times. Now, even in its stated purpose for this visit, the Jamaica Observer is explicitly saying that we need to strike that balance to show you that there is a reason why all these atrocities are taking place. And they're employing this tactic in order to make it seem as if they're striking a balance when we can clearly see with our own eyes that both sides are not equal. Nothing could be further from the truth. And they're also employing a common tactic in media known as salience, when an article or a topic is covered in such a way that deliberately highlights and emphasizes certain points. So when certain topics and certain issues are given emphasis and others are placed into the background, such as when, they mention that, and there are some people who are having difficulty finding food. Perhaps the most blatant example of salience we've seen in the past year is how the media has systematically dehumanized Palestinian lives while giving us full-length, in-depth stories about how the war has impacted people in Israel. Just look at how this CNN article was written to elicit sympathy for an IOF soldier who had unalived himself after committing various atrocities. Some of these atrocities detailed in the very article in Gaza, and had unalived himself as a result of dealing with PTSD from that. Look at how he was humanized in that article versus the very article describing the people who he meted out those atrocities on. In emphasizing certain points and de-emphasizing certain points, they are shaping public perception of the topic in a way that does not present a clear and factual understanding of the situation. And so the next question we have to ask is, what kind of articles is the Jamaica Observer reporter then, after he has seen his perspective from, his host's point of view, and, he has visited these historical sites with biblical connections and have all these talks with their Ministry of Foreign Affairs and so on. What kind of articles is he going to present to the Jamaican public? Well, we don't have to wonder. Here's what Jason Cross wrote on December 7th. The headline of the article reads, Israeli military official rejects accusation of genocide. The article begins with a military officer pointing to a fence, and it is captioned, Israeli Defense Forces spokesman Ronnie Kaplan points to the Gaza Strip in Palestine on Thursday. So the Observer reporter was meters away from the mass atrocities, from mass starvation, from mass killing taking place. Let's look at what he wrote from that point of view. So I'm going to read a bit of the article. The quotes are pretty long, but bear with me. Let me read a bit of what he said, because I think it's important. On Thursday, Kaplan said there was no doubt that there is an industry of lies that is one of the biggest frauds in the 21st century about how Israel is doing what it is doing. We just want to live in peace. This war is with the terrorist group Hamas and all the agents of Iran. He described Gaza as the most complex urban battlefield in the world, charging that Hamas is embedded behind 2.4 million civilians. Hamas is increasingly concentrating forces and weapons in civilian shelters and in buildings until today. Right now in the Gaza Strip, we have extensive combat against Hamas forces in the areas such as Jabalia. There were 1,300 terrorists killed there, and more than 700 terrorists surrendered since the last combats there in the last weeks. Is he talking about the people that they stripped down and handcuffed and kidnapped and took into their dungeons across the border? Is this the people who surrendered? The doctors and paramedics and the people, the fathers, these are the people who, anyway. Since the 7th of October, we have taken out 17,000 terrorists and destroyed 23 of 24 battalions of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. He acknowledged that civilians in Gaza have suffered in the fighting, but at the same time, he said the number of Palestinians killed during targeted strikes is being inflated by Hamas. Hamas is giving a number, this is a quote, Hamas is giving a number to international media, but it is very difficult to confirm this number. In other conflicts, the number that Hamas gives is bigger than the actual number of deaths. So what should you take from all this? Well, one of the first things is to understand that media is a business, and media is going to always cater to the people who give them the most money, make them the most money, right? And that is not the readers. Right? So when they present information to the readers, they're presenting the information that the people who have a vested interest in that business, that's the information that those people want them to present. That's the first thing. And the Jamaica Observer is no different. The Jamaica Observer is owned by a certain family in Jamaica, and the Jamaica Observer represents the interests of those people. The Jamaica Observer, as a media house, has always acted in a way that represents the interests of the people who owns it. And we must never forget that when we read the Observer and when we consume other forms of media, they glean a company not to be accepted. Elon Musk didn't purchase Twitter because he's a champion of free speech. Jeff Bezos did not buy the Washington Post because he cares about the views of the American working class. And if you really believe that the Stewart family owns the Jamaica Observer because they care about your salvation enough to bring you the biblical perspective of what is now taking place in the country of Palestine? Well, if you believe that, I have a really nice bridge to sell you in Bogwalk, St. Catherine at an unbelievable price. Call me.